Hello there, and welcome to the weekly Outside Views magazine on American politics. The US Air Force has unveiled its new B-21 Raider stealth bomber, the Air Force's first new bomber model in decades. The high-tech aircraft was presented on Friday in a lavish staging on the premises of the Northrop Grumman Armaments Company in Palmdale in California. The B-21 is even more difficult to detect than other stealth bombers thanks to the latest technology for enemy radar and can theoretically fly unmanned. It can fire both nuclear and conventional missiles. The price per aircraft is likely to be just under $700 million. That's why the US Air Force wants to buy at least 100 of those machines. The first flight is planned for next year. The B-21 is intended to gradually replace the previous B-1 and B-2 bombers in the Air Force, which date back to the Cold War era. The B-21 will be the backbone of our future bomber force, said Air Force spokeswoman Anne Stefanik. The aircraft has the ability to enter the world's most competitive risk areas and threaten any destination worldwide. The name Raider is a tribute to the so-called Doolittle raid that was a raid in World War II. Months after the Japanese surprise attack on the US base at Pearl Harbor in December 1941, US bombers led by Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle counterattacked Tokyo. It was the first US attack on mainland Japan and a symbolically important success for the US forces. Former US President Donald Trump suffered a legal defeat in the legal dispute surrounding the investigation into his handling of secret government documents. An appeals court decided in a decision published on Thursday evening that it was not legal to appoint a special representative to review the case. At Trump's insistence, he should examine the documents that were seized during a search of the ex-president's private home Mar-a-Lago in Florida. It was mainly a question of whether the documents were private or professional and security related. The district court that ruled on the special counsel's appointment did not have the authority to prohibit the state from using lawfully seized documents in a criminal investigation, it said. And this is a win for the US Department of Justice, which has been investigating Trump for several months. In August, the FBI searched Trump's Mar-a-Lago mansion in Palm Beach in Florida and confiscated various classified information, some with the highest level of secrecy. By keeping the documents in his private home long after Trump left office, he could have committed a criminal offense. It is still unclear whether Trump could ultimately be charged. Trump criticizes the authorities' actions against him as politically motivated and sees it as an attempt to prevent him from moving back into the White House. The Republican has since officially announced that he wants to run again as a candidate for his party in the 2024 presidential election. Whether the Republicans will ultimately make him their presidential candidate remains to be seen. Trump also took legal action to defend himself against the investigation of the government documents. In court, he had fought to appoint the special representative to review the seized documents and to stop the authorities from viewing the documents until then. So everything like this has been overturned by the decision of the Court of Appeal. And according to media reports, the US Treasury Department is making former President Donald Trump's tax documents available to a congressional committee. The Treasury Department has complied with last week's court decision. That's how the US media quoted a ministry spokesman as saying on Wednesday. Accordingly, the Committee on Ways and Means should be allowed to see the papers, a committee that deals with taxes and finances. It is one of the oldest and most important bodies of the American Parliament. Trump had refused to use legal means to release the documents for years and finally failed in the country's highest court last week. The Supreme Court had dismissed a request by his attorneys to stop the transmission of tax documents to the still Democratic-led Treasury Committee in the House of Representatives. Contrary to usual practice in the United States, real estate entrepreneur Trump did not make his tax returns public, either as presidential candidate or after moving into the White House. Critics therefore suspect that the Republican has something to hide. Among other things, the Democrats want to check whether the documents reveal conflicts of interest on the part of the entrepreneur and whether he has used questionable methods to save taxes. 2 weeks ago, Trump announced that he would run again as a Republican presidential candidate in the 2024 election. And according to the reports, the documents are not expected to be released to the public immediately. It also remained unclear whether the members of the committee could already view the documents, but I'll talk about this later in the video. For the committee, the Supreme Court's decision was a last-minute success. With Republicans winning the US midterm elections and set to rule the House of Representatives by early January, the Democratic-led body has little time left, a little to align in the matter. Trump is currently involved in various legal disputes, including because of taking the secret documents to his private estate after leaving the White House I mentioned earlier. The US Democrats have completed a generational change at the top and elected Hakeem Jeffries as the first black faction leader in the House of Representatives. The 52-year-old was elected by his party peers in the Congress chamber on Wednesday after 82-year-old Nancy Pelosi announced her departure. The representative from New York was already a member of the Parliamentary Group Executive Committee and had announced after the congressional elections that he wanted to lead the Democrats in the House of Representatives in the future. The call for generation change had recently become louder within the party. Again and again, there were representatives from their own ranks who spoke out against Pelosi and called for a change and rejuvenation. Critics saw her as a representative of the old guard and called for her to make way for someone younger after so many years in Congress and at the head of her faction. Her successor, however, will have less power because the Democrats lost their majority in the House of Representatives in the midterm elections in November. As a result, Jeffries will lead his party as a minority in the House of Representatives and not as Speaker of the House. That means the chairman of the House of Representatives. That will be a Republican. Republican lawmakers have nominated Kevin McCarthy as their nominee to chair the House of Representatives. The vote will be in early January. However, McCarthy should not have it easy, as Jeffries will do, because the Democrats have gathered relatively united behind him. Republican McCarthy, on the other hand, has to fear dissenters, a problem given his party's thin majority in the House of Representatives. The leader of the extreme right-wing militia Oath Keepers has been sentenced almost 2 years after the storming of the U.S. Capitol. As U.S. media reported from the court in U.S. capital Washington, after several days of deliberation, a jury found Stewart Rhodes guilty of seditious conspiracy, a crime rarely recognized in the country's judicial history. Rhodes was accused, along with co-defendants, of plotting to use force to prevent the transfer of power after the 2020 presidential election. Earlier this year, the U.S. Department of Justice filed charges against Rhodes and other participants in the Capitol attack. Among other things, they planned to travel to Washington on January 6th in 2021 and organized weapons, paramilitary equipment, and training in combat techniques in advance, it said. Several of the defendants had entered the Capitol themselves, while others had taken care of further coordination outside the seat of Congress and partly outside the city. The Justice Department said the maximum penalty could be up to 20 years in prison for seditious conspiracy. Rhodes' sentence will be determined at a later date. Supporters of then-President Donald Trump stormed the House of Parliament in Washington on January 6th in 2021, as I said, to prevent Democrat Joe Biden's November 2020 election victory from being confirmed. 5 people died as a result. The attack on the heart of US democracy shook the country, and Trump had previously incited his supporters in a speech. Rhodes claimed during the trial that he had no plans to attack the US Capitol. The US Senate voted by a bipartisan majority to enshrine the Respect for Marriage Act in federal law. 61 senators voted for the bill. It is now considered likely that the text for the final signature will end up on US President Joe Biden's desk. The House of Representatives still has to vote on the draft, but the project should be accepted there, however, because the Democrats still have a majority in the Congress chamber. If the law passes this hurdle, it would be a major victory for Biden and his Democrats. Same-sex marriage was legalized in the United States by a 2015 Supreme Court decision. It declared unconstitutional a 1996 law that established marriage as a covenant between a man and a woman. However, concerns have arisen in recent months when the right-wing majority on the Supreme Court reversed the Supreme Court's abortion rights ruling dating back to the 1970s. US Vice President Kamala Harris referred to the background of the law on Twitter. The Respect for Marriage Act ultimately stands for a simple principle. All Americans are equal, and their government should treat them as such. Today we are proud to be one step closer to that ideal. Former US President Donald Trump has called for repealing the US Constitution and other laws to invalidate the 2020 election. He also called for his immediate reinstatement as president. Are you throwing away the results of the 2020 presidential election and declaring the legitimate winners, or do you have a new election? That's how Trump ranted, partly in capital letters, on his social media. A fraud of this magnitude allows for the repeal of all rules and regulations, including those in the Constitution, he wrote. And Trump repeated his repeatedly refuted claims that he won the 2020 election. Trump said the founders of the United States did not want voter fraud. He also accused the big tech companies of siding with the Democrats. White House spokesman Andrew Bates said on Saturday that Trump's remarks are an abomination to the soul of our nation and should be universally condemned. You can't only love Americans when you win, Bates said in a statement. The American Constitution is a sacrosanct document that, for over 200 years, has guaranteed that liberty and the rule of law shall prevail in our great country. The Constitution encapsulates the American people together, regardless of party, and elected leaders swear to uphold it, he said. John Bolton, former national security advisor under Trump and ambassador to the United Nations, condemned his ex-boss's statements. No American conservative can follow Donald Trump's call to suspend the Constitution based on the results of the 2020 election. And all true conservatives must oppose his 2024 presidential campaign. That's what he wrote on Twitter. Earlier this week, Trump expressed his support for the rioters who stormed the US Capitol on January 6th in 2021, saying in a video during a fundraiser, "People have been treated unconstitutionally and very, very unfairly, in my opinion," he said. Trump had recently announced that he wanted to run again for the presidency, as I said earlier. However, it's unclear whether the Republicans will put him up. Many Trump-backed candidates did poorly in the midterm elections. Instead of a great electoral success and a red wave, the party was left with an expected majority in the House of Representatives, but a very small one. And Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is considered an internal challenger to Trump. The former US president keeps claiming that the 2020 election was rigged. Numerous court decisions contradict this, as do many Republicans. There are several investigations against Trump, including because of the secret documents I mentioned earlier, but this man wants to be president again. It was an unprecedented horror that he was president once. Does anybody really want him to be president for a second time? I can't understand this, but populism still works. It didn't only work in the 1930s, it obviously still works today. And that concludes my weekly magazine on American politics for this week. But every day you get a new magazine on this channel, so come back tomorrow. And I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.